Hi guys, welcome back. We're going to do another Wordcloud today, but this is something I call a Fredcloud. So check this out. There it is. So I have a graph here from Fred. This is the federal funds effective rate. And you can see we have two word clouds in this graph. We have one over here before COVID, and we have one after COVID. So I'm going to show you how to make these two word clouds and get them to fit into a Fred graph like this. Now, if we look at these word clouds, what's interesting about them is I got the text for these from scraping FOMC press releases from before COVID and after COVID. So I looked at all of the FOMC press releases from 2016 to 2019, and I scraped the text from the websites. I collected them all, I added them all together to make one big block of text, and then I processed that text into this word cloud. Then I did the same for the FOMC press releases after COVID. Then I made the word clouds fit into masks. So I made a mask of this area under the curve, and then I made another mask of this area under the curve. So I'm going to show you how to do this. So if you remember from the previous video on word clouds, we used natural language processing techniques, and we used some web scraping techniques. We're going to use some of the same code from that first project in this one. And then to make the masks, I used a program called Gimp. So let's jump into this. So here's my program file, and I'll post this in the description of the video. But we're going to install some of the same packages as the previous project. Here you can see we have Wordcloud, Pillow, NLTK. Now this last one we have numpy, but you want to be sure to install that. And here's all the resources I used. If you want to consult the same resources I did, I listed them all here. Now here are the modules we import from those packages. Some of the same modules as the previous video, but now we have MP from the numpy package. Now if you're thinking, how can you get all of the text from all of those press releases? Let's take a look at some of those press releases. Here they are. This one is from January 27th, 2016. This is the first press release in our project here. We have the text here in the center. Now, pay attention to the URL. We have federalreserve.gov, news events, press releases, monetary, and then we have this 8-digit number here, 20160127. 2016 is the year, 01 is the month, and 27 is the day. Now let's look at another press release. This one is from December 19th, 2018. And look at the URL. The URL is basically identical to the previous URL, except for that 8-digit number at the end. This one is 2018-1219. 2018, the year, 12, the month, 19, the day. And finally, another press release. And the URL is identical except for those 8 numbers at the end. So if I wanted to scrape multiple web pages for text, I can use the URL, which is basically the same for all the web pages, and then I can change the 8-digit number at the end according to which page I want to scrape. And so that's exactly what I did. So I collected all those 8-digit numbers at the end of the URL. Each 8-digit number represents a different FOMC press release from a different day. And I made a list of these numbers before COVID and after COVID. You can see here I call it meetings pre. We have these brackets denoting a list, with each number separated by a comma. So each item here in the list is separated by a comma. And these dashes at the beginning and the end denote a string. So we have a list of strings here. Then I made another list. I called it meetings post, a list of dates here after COVID. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create for loops and loop through these lists, changing the URL with each new press release. And the part that's going to change is that 8-digit number at the end. So to do that, I made this thing called meetings post pre, and it's a list of the two lists, meetings pre and meetings post. And I started a for loop. I said for meetings in range, length, meetings post pre. So this is kind of a trick for the for loop. We have two lists that we want to loop through. And I want to loop through the first list, here meetings pre, and then I want to create a word cloud from that first list, that first loop through the pre-COVID period. So for meetings in range, length, meetings post pre, length of meetings post pre is just 2. We have 2 items in it, so the length is 2. So the range is going to be from 0 to 1. We have just 2 items. Python begins at 0 and then it goes to 1. And then the next thing here, we're going to call this thing text, and it's just going to be a blank string. So why do we have text here equal to a blank string? For this first group, meetings pre, we're going to loop through and format this little part in the URL with curly brackets. And we're going to format it according to the date in this first list up here. So I'm going to go through this loop, which is going through this loop up here. We use some of the same code as before. We're going to scrape the web page, and the soup item we're going to call text_0. And guess what? It has the same class identifier for the text in each different FOMC press release. It's always the same class identifier. We're going to call text, that blank string we had up here, we're going to call it text plus text_0. For each date here, text is going to be equal to whatever text was before plus the new thing that we just scraped, the new website that we just scraped. So we're going to loop through and we're going to get text from each one of these. And this text item here is just going to grow and expand and expand and expand until we're at the end of this loop, until we're at the end of this list. And then what happens? We go up to the previous level and we're going to start for the second item in this loop, meetings post. So that's why I set text equal to this blank string so that it starts over when we go through the next list of meetings. Now, for each list that we go through here in meetings post pre, we're going to do all that natural language processing. So all the processing techniques from the previous video, they're all right here. In fact, this might be identical code. We even define our function getWordNetPOS. We define final words. We have our little list of words we're going to delete, and then we create our word clouds. After looping through all of these dates here for the meetings pre, the loop continues with the next item in meetings post pre, and we create another word cloud from meetings post. So that's why this code is tabbed over. It's within the original loop that we first made. Now, because we make these word clouds to fit a certain form within that Fred graph, we have to do a little bit of pre-processing of the image, and that's what I'm going to do now. So you can download this program called Gimp. I'm using Gimp 2.10. I'm going to go to File and Open. I'm going to open fred.png. Now this is a PNG file of the Fred graph that I just downloaded directly from Fred. If you go to the Fred website, just do a Google search of Fred federal funds rate. Here it's going to be the first item on your search. You'll see a graph that looks like this. Now you have a slider bar at the bottom. Remember we went from like 2016 to 2024 roughly. So I'm going to move the slider over to about 2016. You can see this looks pretty similar to my graph. All that you're going to do now is you could edit the graph if you wanted to, but after editing, go to download and then choose image. And that's going to give you the .png file for the Fred graph. And that's what we open in Gimp. We're going to use something called the fuzzy select tool. So if you go up here to the upper left-hand corner to your tool set, choose fuzzy select tool, click kind of underneath the graph here, underneath the line. And the fuzzy select tool is going to fuzzily select the object that it thinks you want. And so here we have this part underneath the graph. That's done a pretty good job. If I left click over here, we selected this part underneath the graph. Perfect. Let's start with this part over here. This is going to be our first mask. Now to make a word cloud with a mask, you need to darken the area that you want to be the word cloud. And then you want to make everything else white. So the background has to be white and the thing you want masked as the word cloud has to be black. So I'm going to go to the bucket fill tool, and the active foreground color, I want it to be black. Left click and drag to this lower left hand part here. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to just left click in that selected region we have here. There it is. Now, how can I select everything but the selected region? Go to select and go down to invert. Now everything else is selected. And then I'm just going to hit the button delete, and it's deleted. Now, the active background color is also black here. So let's change this. I'm just going to fill it in to white. There we go. Here we have our mask. Now, one other thing I like to do, if you look closely at the edges here, some of the edges are kind of jagged. Wordcloud doesn't like those jagged edges because it tries to fit text into an object. And if you have jagged edges, it has trouble with that. So what I'm going to do is select and feather. We're just going to kind of feather those edges, soften the edges of our object. And I'm going to hit OK. I just set it for 5 here, which is default. And it's going to soften things up around those edges. And the end product is going to look a little better. I'm holding Control. I'm going to use my mouse wheel and zoom out. Now notice the dimensions of this mask are identical to the Fred graph that we first had, right? I didn't change the outer dimensions here at all. This is going to be handy when we paste one mask over the other mask and then overlay another transparent graph on top of that. So you don't have to save this, but we're just going to export it. So go to File, go to Export As. I'm going to call this Fred_1. The 1 here denotes the period post-COVID. So it's going to identify that list of meetings. And we're going to make another mask for pre-COVID. We'll call that mask Fred_0. I'm going to export this. For me, I already have this image, so I'm just going to replace it and then click Export. All right, let's make our other mask. I'm going to hit Control-Z a bunch of times. Here's our first selection we had here. This is the first selection from our Fuzzy Select tool. Let's fill in the area. We use the Bucket Fill tool, select black, and there we have our selection blackened. We'll go to Select and Invert. Remember, everything else we're going to delete. And let's change it back to white. Okay, let's use the Feather tool, Feather option. We'll hit OK. We're going to make Wordclouds separately and then paste one on top of the other one. And when we do that, we don't want to paste over the other mask that we have. So I'm going to crop this so that when we do a paste, it doesn't cover the previous mask. You want to left click and drag the edges so it's the same dimension as the original Fred graph, right? We want the height here to be the same. So when we overlay, it looks nice. And once you have this box where you want it, just hit enter. And there we go. I'm going to export this as a PNG file. File, export as. This is going to be Fred0. Go export. I'm going to replace. This is going to be a new .png file for you, so you won't see that. We'll go to export. We're good. Now, as long as we're here, we need to make a transparent graph or a .png file. So I'm going to hit Control-Z a bunch of times till we're back here where we have the first part here selected. Now, once we make our word clouds, we paste them together. We're going to have two nice little word clouds here with a white background. I'll show you this in the code here in a second. But we need to make a Fred graph with transparent sections where these selections are. And then we're going to overlay that so we get this nice Fred graph as our background for the word clouds. So I'm going to hit this fuzzy select tool, left click that. I'm going to hold a shift and left click the other selection over here. Now I'm just going to delete those two sections. So hit the delete button. And you can see they turned black. Why did they turn black? Because our active background color is black. Now we need to add some transparency to these black sections. So I'm going to right click, I'll go to layer, and I'll go to transparency. And we're going to add what's called an alpha channel. And you'll see this little checkerboard icon. I hit delete, and we can see this checkerboard pattern now. We've removed that active background layer that was black. Now, when you see this checkerboard pattern, you'll be able to see right through these sections underneath the graph. And that's what we want because we're going to overlay this over the two word clouds. So what's going to take the place of these checkerboard patterns is the word clouds. Now you save this like you save any other .png file. We're going to export as. We're going to call this Fredtrans for transparency. We're going to replace, and I'm going to go to export. And we've got everything now. Now we can take a look at these items. Here's Fred_1. Here's Fred_0. And here's that transparent graph we made. Now you can see it looks black here, but these are actually transparent sections. This, it's black. Now we have some lines here. It turns out that isn't really going to be an issue. And let's look back at our code. So NP is for that numpy module that we imported in. Basically, this is going to allow us to cycle through these images to make two different word clouds. So I have Fred here, underscore in curly brackets, and the curly brackets are going to change to a 0 for the medians pre-COVID, and a 1 for the medians post-COVID. So medians here, if you remember, is the little item that we're using to cycle through medians post and pre in our for loop. So the curly brackets are going to change based on medians. And medians is going to be 0 or 1 based on the range length thing that we have here, where length is like 2, ranges from 0 to 1. Another part of the code here I changed for the word clouds is the contour color. Contour color is default black, I believe, which is going to give a nice line contouring the word cloud, whatever shape you have it in. Now we don't need the line to contour the word cloud because in our Fred graph, we already have the federal funds rate, which acts as like a barrier, a boundary for the word cloud. So I just changed the contour color here to white, and we won't have any boundary around the word cloud. And the word clouds themselves, word cloud masked, and then 0 or 1 based on which word cloud we're making. Again, we have this format option here. Medians is the thing that's going to define what's in these curly brackets. So I just made this before. So at the beginning of the video, you saw the word cloud. I made these two files here, these two PNG files. Let's take a look at them. Here's Wordcloud masked 0, and here's Wordcloud masked 1. So you can see there's no contour around them, no boundary. We just have the white background. That black part that we had before for the mask, it's now been filled by the word cloud. Now, we've made these two word clouds separately, and I'm just going to paste over the two word clouds. We're going to paste one over the other. And we can do that if we identify the location in one of the images where we want the other image to be pasted over. And that's what I do in the code here. So first I define the images, image 1, image 2, image 3, and image 4. Image 1 is the Fred graph that we originally downloaded from the Fred website. Image 2 is that word cloud that's masked. It has the word cloud with a white background, and this is pre-COVID. You can tell by the 0. Image 3 is post-COVID. It has the 1. Image 4 is our transparent Fred graph. So image 3, we're going to paste image 2 onto, and where are we going to paste it? At these coordinates 0, 0, which is the upper left-hand corner of the PNG file. So image 3, I'm pasting this image, this whole PNG file, right up here at 0, 0. Remember when we made that mask, it had the same height as the original PNG file from Fred. And I just cropped it. And I cropped it so when we paste, it's only going to cover half of this PNG file, half of this image. We don't want to cover this part of the image. So let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to run this again. Here I have no transparency mask specified. It's simulating a raster overlay. There they are. It's exactly what we want. It's the same dimension as the original Fred graph. So this is perfect. Now once we have this, we just need to change the background here. So I'm just going to overlay that Fred graph with the transparent sections here. These word clouds are going to shine through the transparent section. So here's the code here. So we're going to paste over image 3 with image 4, which is fredtrans.png. Where are we going to paste it? Right at 0, 0, that top left-hand corner. But now we're going to define a mask, and the mask is going to be image 4. Mask, here we're defining as our transparency mask. Image 4 has transparent sections, and I'm going to show that image. Now, each time you run this program, we're not referring to text that's been downloaded, right? We're visiting all of these FOMC press release web pages. And so it might take you a little bit of processing time, but there it is. So we have our final product here, and this looks great. You can see here we don't have any, there's some artifacts here. If you look really closely, you can kind of see a little dot maybe here and some dots here, but looking from afar, this looks fantastic. If we want to kind of interpret these word clouds, we can do that. So if you look at this pre-COVID period, we have labor market, market condition, and inflation expectation. These are things that the Fed is typically looking at. Nothing kind of surprising about this. Fed cares a great deal about market conditions, the labor market. But if we look at post-COVID, you can see a more varied array or assortment of words. We have things like public health here. Here's Treasury security. Notice as the federal funds rate goes up, Fed is talking more about it. Household business. Fed is paying closer attention to household businesses, households in general perhaps. Agency security. So if you were to make a word cloud or maybe to use some natural language processing techniques, what would you look at? We can look at FOMC press releases. This is fun, but what are some other cases where you could use this? What are some other cases where you could use natural language processing techniques and make sense of some natural language texts? Let me know, leave a comment below. Once you start using these processing techniques, we start to look at text as data, quantifiable and measurable. We could take all of these words from all of these different web pages, count up the number of words, assess which words occur most frequently. That's kind of what the word cloud is doing. We could take one text and subtract words from another text. If we look at these FOMC press releases, we know from the previous video, they all kind of use the similar language. So if we wanted to find the differences between one press release and another press release, maybe we could just subtract the words and see what's left. We could do something like that. How would you use some of these techniques? Let me know, leave a comment below. If you like this video, like the video, subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.